The herbalist's shop sat at the quiet end of Blackthorn Crossing's main street, wedged between a saddler's bench and a shuttered candlemaker that had been empty since before Raven came to town. It was the kind of shop people walked past without seeing until they needed it, which was exactly the kind of shop Raven had been looking for when she stopped in Blackthorn Crossing 6 months ago and never left. She unlocked the door every morning at the 6th bell. Not the 5th, not the 7th. The 6th bell, always. Because that was the bell the inn rang when the kitchen fire was up and Olwen started pulling the first loaves of bread out of the oven, and Raven had learned in 6 months of careful living that if you did the same small things at the same small times, people stopped remembering that you had arrived from somewhere they did not know and stopped wondering when you might leave. She swept the 3 wooden steps out front. She wiped down the counter with a clean cloth. She refilled the oil lamp. She checked the level of the tin of bone set and the tin of yarrow and the tin of white willow bark, because those were the 3 most popular remedies in a winter village and the 3 she had learned to keep in abundance. She lit a single wax candle on the counter and set the stone mortar beside it because customers liked to see a shop at work when they walked in, and even when she had nothing to grind, she would grind something. Dried chamomile, a crust of stale bread for the birds, anything. Because idle hands look like waiting hands, and waiting hands looked like a woman expecting someone, and a woman expecting someone was a woman people remembered. Raven had not been remembered by anyone important in 6 months. She intended for that to continue for the rest of her life. The short hunting knife sat at her belt in its worn leather sheath, as it had for 6 months, and as it had for every hour of every day before that for the whole 1.5 years since she buried her mother. She did not wear it to be seen. She wore it because the weight of it against her hip was the only reliable reassurance she had that she was still the person who had left Drakehold at the end of last summer, with that knife in her hand and her wolf howling at her heels. Without the weight, she had the feeling sometimes that she might float off into the winter sky and disappear, which was another way of saying that she might finally let herself rest, and Raven had decided long ago that she would not allow herself to rest until she had finished what she had started. She had started something 6 months ago. She had not finished it. There was a second brother. The first customer of the morning was a woman named Tilda, who ran the dye works 2 streets over and came in every 3rd morning for a decoction of a lemon balm and dried poppy to help her sleep through the clatter of her own mind. Tilda paid in copper halfpennies counted out on the counter with the careful attention of a woman who had been poor her whole life and did not trust money not to vanish between her fingers. Raven took each coin, touched the edge of it against the wood, and slid it into the small iron box under the counter without comment. Tilda liked her because Raven never asked how she was sleeping. Raven liked Tilda because Tilda never asked how she had come to Blackthorn Crossing. The second customer was a boy of about 9, sent by his mother for a salve for his father's cough. Raven sold him a small jar wrapped in brown paper and tied with hemp twine. He paid with 3 copper halfpennies and a dried apricot from his pocket that he set on the counter with great seriousness, as if it were part of the price. Raven accepted the apricot. She placed it in the wooden bowl where she kept the candle. The boy was pleased. Raven liked the boy for the same reason she liked Tilda. By the time the 9th bell rang, the bell for mid-morning, the one Olwen rang from the inn kitchen when the second bread was out and coffee was on, Raven had served 11 customers and taken in 64 copper halfpennies, 3 dried apricots, a jar of honey, and a small folded note from the blacksmith's wife asking whether Raven might come by at the 12th bell to look at the wife's infected thumb. Raven nodded to the note, tucked it into the pocket of her leather apron, and carried on. She did not look up when the shop door opened again at the 10th bell. She was grinding pale burdock root in the mortar, and she had found in 6 months that the slow, predictable rhythm of grinding was what kept her hands from reaching for the knife every time the bell above the door jingled. She heard bootsteps cross the small shop and stop in front of the counter. She heard the soft, familiar sound of Olwen's breath, which Olwen had developed a bad wheeze from 40 years of kitchen smoke, and which Raven would have recognized anywhere. "Morning, Olwen. Morning, love." Raven lifted her head. Olwen was standing at the counter in her linen apron and a warm wool shawl pinned at her throat with a brass pin shaped like a wheat stalk. A small cloth-covered basket hooked over one arm. Her graying auburn hair was pinned in its usual loose bun with 3 wooden hairpins, and her soft hazel eyes were doing the thing they always did when Olwen came down for the morning visit, flicking once over Raven's face to check her color, once over the shop to check the crowd, once to the door to check who might walk in next, and then settling warm and steady on Raven's hands, because Olwen was a woman who understood that a person's hands told a truer story than their face. Raven's hands were steady. Olwen was pleased. "Bread's warm. I brought you the end loaf." She set the basket on the counter and lifted the cloth, and the good, yeasty smell of fresh, dark bread filled the small shop. "Butter's underneath, and a jar of the quince I put up in autumn because you said you liked it." "I did say that." I remembered. Olwen's mouth curved. It's the kind of thing a person likes to know someone remembered. It was. Raven did not say so, but she let her mouth turn up at the corners in the small, private way she had grown comfortable doing around Olwen in the last few weeks, and Olwen, who knew the exact value of that expression, accepted it with a small, pleased nod and sat herself down on the wooden stool by the counter that Raven kept there for exactly this reason. Because Olwen came by every morning at the 10th bell and stayed for a cup of the herbal tea Raven kept on the small iron brazier in the back of the shop, and it was the one appointment in Raven's day that she had stopped dreading and started, against her own better judgment, to enjoy. She poured the tea. She set a small wooden plate between them and broke the end loaf into 4 pieces. She spread pale fresh butter on 2 pieces and handed one to Olwen without asking whether Olwen wanted it. Olwen accepted it without asking whether Raven thought she needed it. This was the shape of them. They had built it slowly, the way people build things in winter. One quiet, small, useful gesture at a time, nothing said aloud about what any of it meant. "There's news from the North Road," Olwen said, and bit a small, neat bite out of her bread. Raven drank her tea. "Is there?" "A party of riders passed through Eldon's Ford 3 nights ago. 6 in gray cloaks, led by a tall woman with coppery skin and a sword longer than she is. They stayed one night at the Ford Inn and rode out before dawn. Heading? North and west. Sellswards." The Ford innkeeper said no, said they paid in silver, slept on the floor, asked polite questions about the road west, and left the room cleaner than they found it. Said they had a silver thorn on their cloaks. Raven's tea paused halfway to her mouth. She set the cup down. She set it down carefully because her hand had decided very suddenly that it did not want to be holding a cup. She placed her palm flat the wood of the counter and she breathed in once through her nose and out once through her mouth. And she looked up at Olwen, and she said in the same small flat voice she used when a customer asked her the price of yarrow, "A silver thorn." "That's what the Ford innkeeper said. Silver thorn on a dark green field." "That's the thorn sigil." "That's what I said too. I said, Tilda, that's the thorn sigil. That's the king's men." Olwen nibbled her bread. "And Tilda said she had heard it was the king himself out on the road, which Tilda hears a great many things, and not all of them are true. But the Ford innkeeper said there was a man in the middle of the party with silver eyes, and he was the one the rest of them took their cue from." "Silver eyes." "That's what the innkeeper said." Raven sat very still. She sat very still for a count of 8, which was the count her mother had taught her as a girl for when her thoughts started to get away from her. Count 8 breaths, and make no decisions, her mother had said, because the first thought is never the right one, and the second thought is usually fear talking, and by the 8th thought you are usually somewhere close to the truth. By the 8th breath, Raven had arrived at the truth, and the truth was this. Kael Thorne, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, was on the road. He was riding west. Blackthorn Crossing was west of Eldon's Ford. Olwen, Raven said, quiet. How far is Eldon's Ford from here? 2 days' ride in winter. And how many days ago did they pass through? 3. Olwen watched her. She did not ask. She never asked. It was the thing that had made Raven stay in Blackthorn Crossing in the first place. 6 months ago, when she had stumbled out of the woods at the edge of the village, half-starved and still bleeding from a shallow cut across her jaw and a deeper cut across her conscience. The first inn she had walked into had been Olwen's, and Olwen had taken one look at her and, without saying a single word, set a bowl of broth in front of her and drawn a hot bath in the back room and given her a clean wool dress that smelled of lavender and said only, "Stay as long as you want. We don't ask names in winter in the north." Olwen had been keeping that promise for 6 months. She was keeping it now. Raven picked up her tea again. Her hand had decided it was willing. "Thank you for telling me. Thought you'd want to know." "I did. I thought you might." They drank their tea. They ate their bread. Olwen finished her piece first, as she always did, and wiped her mouth with the corner of her apron and said, "They might not come this way. They might not. But if they do, yes. You know where the back door is." "I know where the back door is." "Good," Olwen said, and patted Raven's hand once with her own small, warm, dry hand, the way a woman pats the hand of a daughter who is about to walk into the snow for the winter. "Good. Then we won't speak of it again unless we need to." They did not speak of it again. They finished the tea. Olwen gathered her empty basket and tucked it back over her arm and kissed Raven once on the top of the head on her way out the door, which was something she had started doing only in the last month and which Raven had not yet decided how to feel about. Olwen paused at the doorway. She looked back. "Whoever's on that road," she said, "if they come, you remember one thing for me." "What?" "You are not the thing that happened to you." The bell jingled once as she left. Raven stood behind the counter for a long time after the door closed. She listened to the wood of the shop settle, and to the wind moving through the eaves, and to the distant shout of a child in the street. She turned the grinding stone in the mortar 3 slow times. Then she set the pestle down very gently, and she walked to the back room of the shop, and she sat on the narrow wooden bed she kept there against the wall, and she pulled her knees up to her chest the way she had not let herself do in 6 months, and she breathed. She had been dreaming of him again, not of Harland, the one she killed. She had stopped dreaming of Harland 3 months ago. Harland was a thing that had ended. Harland was bones in the snow at the bottom of a frozen ravine 200 miles east of where Raven was sitting right now. And Harland had been quiet in her dreams ever since she had looked down at his body at the bottom of that ravine and understood, with a clarity that had nothing to do with triumph, that a thing which had ended had ended. It was the other one. It was Garrick. Garrick Drake had not been in the trade post the night Harland took her. Garrick had been 200 miles north at Drakehold, keeping ledgers and drinking imported wine and signing the letters that told other alphas where to meet and what to bring. Garrick had never touched her. Garrick had never even seen her face. Garrick, as far as Raven knew, had only ever known her as a line in a ledger. An entry dated the 3rd day of autumn, an omega acquired by his brother from a closed trade post contract, value, unspecified, further disposition, at Harland's discretion. That line was still in Garrick's ledger. Raven was sure of it. Garrick was a methodical man, and a methodical man did not delete entries. He crossed them through with a neat line and a short note. The note next to her line in Garrick's ledger, if Garrick had written it, would say, "Deceased, Winter," or perhaps "Escaped, Winter, presumed deceased," or, and this was the one that had been in Raven's dreams for the last 3 weeks, the one that had been waking her up every night around the 4th bell and making her sit up in the dark in her narrow bed and listen to the creak of the inn settling and the wind against the shutters. Perhaps the note said nothing at all. Perhaps Garrick was waiting. Perhaps Garrick was a man who did not write final notes in his ledger about women whose bodies had not been brought to him. Raven had not brought Harland's body to Garrick. Raven had pushed Harland's body over a frozen ravine in the Black Mountains, and she had watched it disappear into the dark crack between the stones, and she had turned west, and she had walked for 16 days until she arrived at Blackthorn Crossing, and that was the last thing she had ever done in service of the Drake family. And she had decided at the edge of that ravine that it would be the last thing, because she had one brother to kill, and she had killed him, and she was done. She had been telling herself that for 6 months. It had started in the last 3 weeks to sound less convincing. She was not done. She had stopped at one, because she could not reach the other one. Raven closed her eyes. She let her forehead rest against her knees. She listened to her own heartbeat, which was steady, because Raven's heartbeat had been steady for so long now that she had begun to suspect her body had forgotten how to be afraid in the ordinary way and had replaced ordinary fear with something colder and more useful. A kind of wakefulness that did not let her sleep much but did not let her panic either. She sat with her forehead against her knees, and she told herself the thing she had been telling herself for 3 weeks. If Kael Thorne is on the road, he is not on it for you. The Alpha King did not ride 200 miles into winter for a single trade post murder no one had reported. The Alpha King had larger business. The Alpha King had borders and treaties and mountains full of feuding minor lords. If Kael Thorne was on the road, he was on it for something bigger than a dead alpha in a ravine. But the Thorne party had ridden west from Eldon's Ford. And west from Eldon's Ford was a short list of villages. And on that short list, Blackthorn Crossing was the last one before the road turned north into the Black Mountains and wound up toward Drakehold. Raven lifted her head off her knees. She unfolded herself off the bed. She walked back out into the front of the shop. She resumed grinding her burdock root in the mortar because there was nothing useful to be done until something happened. And grinding was the shape of her hands when they were not deciding anything, and she needed her hands to not decide anything for a little while longer. The 10th bell passed. The 11th bell passed. At the 12th bell, she closed the shop and walked 3 streets over to the blacksmith's cottage and looked at the blacksmith's wife's infected thumb, an ingrown nail, badly inflamed, and she cleaned it and drained it and packed it with a poultice of yarrow and honey and wrapped it in clean linen. And she refused payment because the blacksmith's wife had once sent her son around with a wheel of cheese when Raven had been in bed with a winter fever in her first month in the village, and Raven did not forget things like that. She walked back to the shop. She reopened. She served 4 more customers before the 3rd bell of the afternoon. The 3rd bell was when the party of riders came up the main street of Blackthorn Crossing. She heard them before she saw them. Horses moving at a steady walk, not a trot. The sound of a party that had already established it was not in a hurry. She heard the crisp sound of Thyra's voice calling a halt somewhere near the inn. She heard Olwen's voice answer, low and polite, and Raven closed her eyes for 1 long second, and then she opened them, and she dusted her hands on her apron, and she leaned her hips against the counter, and she waited. Because Raven had learned in 6 months of quiet living that when a thing was coming toward you, you stood where you could see it, and you let it arrive. The bell above the door jingled at 1/4 past the 3rd bell. Kael Thorne ducked under the low door frame to enter the shop. He was tall. He had to bend slightly to come through the door, and when he straightened up inside the shop, he seemed to fill the space in a way that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with stillness. He was wearing a dark charcoal cloak pinned with a silver thorn, and the shoulders of the cloak were dusted with new snow from the street. His long black hair was tied back with a leather cord. His beard was short and neatly trimmed. There was a thin, pale scar across his right temple that Raven had not known about. He had not drawn back his hood yet. The hood threw a soft, dark shadow across the upper half of his face, but Raven could see his eyes, and his eyes were silver gray, and they were already looking straight at her. He did not approach the counter. He stood just inside the door, 3 long strides away, with his hands loose at his sides and his weight balanced in a way that Raven recognized on sight. It was the stance of a man who had been trained since boyhood to enter strange rooms without startling the people inside them. "Good afternoon," he said. His voice was low. It was the kind of voice a person could listen to for a long time without getting tired of it. "I apologize for the intrusion. I understand you are the herbalist." "I am. May I ask your name?" "Ravenel." "Ravenel." He let the word sit in the air between them. "That's a northern name." "It is." "Not a Blackthorn crossing name?" "No." He inclined his head a small fraction. He had not moved from the doorway. "My name is Kael Thorne. I am the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. I would like to ask you a few questions, if you will permit it. If you do not wish to speak with me, I will leave and I will not return. And nothing I do between now and when I leave, Blackthorn Crossing, will prevent that being the end of the matter." Raven looked at him. She did not speak for a long moment. She had been ready for many versions of this visit. She had been ready for soldiers. She had been ready for arrest. She had been ready for a quiet knife in the night. She had not been ready for a man standing 3 strides inside her shop with his hands loose at his sides, telling her in a low, unhurried voice that she could dismiss him. She said, "You may ask your questions." "Thank you." He lifted a gloved hand slowly enough that she could follow the motion without flinching, which she noticed he had calibrated the speed of, and reached inside his cloak and drew out a folded sheet of parchment. He did not approach the counter to give it to her. He held it in his hand. "I have been looking for a man. For some time." "What man?" "His name is Garrick Drake. He is the lord of a hold in the Black Mountains called Drakehold. He is a trafficker of omegas. He has been operating for at least 14 years. I have been, with a small number of other people, quietly gathering the names of his operatives and the names of the women he has taken. I am on my way north to end his operation. I came through Blackthorn Crossing because I was told there was an herbalist here who was new to the village and who may have come from the direction of Drakehold." Raven's hands were very still on the counter. "Who told you that?" "The innkeeper at Eldon's Ford, who served you a bowl of broth 6 months ago when you came through her village. She remembers the scar on your jaw. She remembers that you were walking west from the Black Mountains. She did not know your name, and she did not ask. But when my men stopped at her inn 3 nights ago and asked whether she had seen any omegas come down the Drakehold Road in the last year, she gave us a description, and she said, and I am quoting her, 'She was a hard, quiet woman, and I hope you leave her alone.'" The corner of Raven's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, she said, "She was very kind to me. I would like you to know that I paid her double for her room, and I told her that I would do her no harm and ask her no more questions, and that if you told me to leave you alone, I would do the same for you." "Understood. Thank you." He unfolded the parchment. He did not come any closer to the counter. He held it up where she could see it from her side of the room. A list of names written in a neat slanted hand, some crossed through with a single line, some not. "This is a partial list," he said. "These are women who have been taken by Garrick Drake, or by his brother Harland Drake, or by the men in their employ. Some of these names I know because the families reported the disappearances. Some I know because my people recovered bodies, and the bodies had tattoos or charms that allowed us to name them. Some I know because a recovered survivor told us the names of the women she had been held with. The names with lines through them are women we have confirmed dead. The names without lines are women who are either dead and unconfirmed or alive and unreturned, or," he paused very deliberately, "alive and not missing from anywhere they want to return to." Raven's eyes moved down the list. She found her own name on the 7th line, Ravenel Stormhold. No line through it. No. She did not react. "That 3rd category," Kael Thorne said quietly, "is the one I care about most, because those are the women who have made their own way out, and I would not insult them by suggesting they need to be found and brought back to anywhere. I would only like to know that they are alive, if they are willing to tell me." Raven looked up from the list. She met his eyes across the shop. She said, "I am alive." "Thank you." "Ravenel Stormhold is alive and is not missing from anywhere she wants to return to." "Thank you." Kael Thorne folded the parchment and slid it back inside his cloak. He bowed his head, not a deep bow, a small, courteous tilt, the kind a man gives to a woman whose time he has taken, and he said, "Then I have asked what I came to ask, and I will leave. Thank you for your patience, Ravenel." I apologize again for the intrusion." He turned toward the door. He had his hand on the latch when Raven said quietly, "Your Grace." He paused. He turned back. "Yes?" "There is something you should know before you ride north." "Yes?" "Harland Drake is dead." He was very still. He did not look surprised. He did not look pleased. He looked at her, the way a person looks at a very important fact that has just arrived in a room, and he said, "How dead?" "Entirely." "When?" "6 months ago, the first week of last autumn, in the Black Mountains, on the Ridge Trail 2 days' ride south of Drakehold. He is at the bottom of a frozen ravine in a place where I do not think anyone will find him without a very great deal of looking." "I see." "I left nothing on the body that would name him. His signet is in my apron drawer in the back room of this shop. I kept it because I wanted to be sure I would not forget what he looked like. I have not yet decided whether I will keep it or bury it." "I see." "His brother does not know. I believe his brother suspects. I believe his brother has been waiting for news." "That is my understanding as well." They looked at each other. He said very quietly, "May I ask you one question, Ravenel?" "You may." He took one small breath in. He let it out. "Why did you stop at one?" Raven heard the question. She felt it go into her like a small, clean blade under the ribs. Not to hurt her, just to find the exact place where the truth had been sitting for 6 months in her chest, untouched and unsaid. She felt it find the place. She felt the place open. She said, "Because I couldn't reach the other one." He nodded once. He said, "If you were able to reach him, would you?" "Yes." "Thank you," he said, "for telling me the truth." And then, very carefully, very gently, the way a person puts down a thing that they have been holding for a long time, he said, "Ravenel, I have been hunting Garrick Drake for 2 years. I cannot, under any law of any hold in the north, charge you with the death of his brother. Harland Drake has been a fugitive from my warrant since I was 29 years old. Any woman who ended him was doing work that my men would have done if we had reached him first. I am not here to punish you. I am here to ask if you will help me reach the other one." "Tell me how." "Not yet. Not here. I will not speak of this in a shop with a bell on the door. If you are willing, I would like you to come to Thornehall with me and with my people. I would like you to meet my counselor and my captain. I would like you to add whatever names and whatever information you are able to my ledger. I would like you to see, with your own eyes, the list I am building and the road I am riding. And then I would like you to decide, with all of that in your hands, whether you want to be part of what comes next. You are asking me to leave Blackthorn Crossing. I am asking you to ride with me for a week. If, at the end of that week, you wish to come back to Blackthorn Crossing and return to your shop and hear nothing more of me for the rest of your life, I will send you back under guard, and I will not speak of this conversation to anyone, and your name on my list will be the same as it was before you answered the door today. Alive. Not missing from anywhere she wants to return to. And if I come, then you come as a free woman and a witness and a partner in the work, not as a prisoner, not as a bride, not as a claimed thing, as Ravenel Stormhold, who walked out of Drakehold on her own feet and settled her own debt alone, and who might or might not wish to settle the last of it with company." Raven stood behind the counter in her small, quiet shop. She looked at the man standing 3 strides inside her door with his hands loose at his sides and the shoulders of his cloak dusted with snow. She said, "I will come for a week." "Thank you. I will need an hour to close the shop and to speak with Olwen. Take whatever time you need. My people are at the inn. We will not leave without you." She did not reach for the knife at her belt. She had not taken her hand off the counter during the entire conversation. She was aware of the knife the way she was aware of her own heartbeat. Steady, present, ready, unneeded. She nodded once to the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and he bowed his head to her, and he turned and he ducked under the low door frame, and he left the shop, and the bell jingled once above the door as it closed behind him. Raven stood behind the counter for a count of 8. Then she walked into the back room of the shop, and she knelt by her narrow bed, and she pulled out the small wooden box she kept beneath it, and she lifted the lid, and she took out the heavy silver signet ring of Harland Drake, and she held it in her palm for the first time in 5 months, and she looked at it for a long moment, and she said very quietly to no one who could hear her, "Hello, Harland, we are going to meet your brother soon." Then she put the ring in the pocket of her apron, and she closed the box, and she went to find Olwen. The inn's kitchen was warm and loud with afternoon baking. Olwen was standing at the kitchen table, rolling out dough with a wooden pin, her sleeves shoved up past her elbows and her auburn hair slipping loose from its pins. She looked up when Raven came in. She took in Raven's face in a single quick glance. She set the rolling pin down, and she wiped her hands carefully on her apron, and she said, "You're going. For a week. With him? With him and his people, under their protection. As a free woman, he gave his word." Olwen nodded slowly. "The other brother." "Yes. You never told me about the other brother. I never told you about any of it. You didn't need to, love. I've been keeping an inn on a trade road for 30 years. I've seen enough." "I know you have." Olwen came around the table. She took Raven's face in her warm, kitchen-reddened hands the way a woman holds a cup of tea she does not want to spill, and she looked into Raven's face for a long moment, and Raven held very still for her, because Olwen was the only person in 6 months she had let touch her face, and even now her body wanted to pull back, and she was making a small private decision not to let it. She stood, she breathed, she let Olwen look. "You come back to me," Olwen said. "I will. Whether you finish it or not, whether you go with him after or not, you come back through my door at least once and tell me it's done, and let me feed you a bowl of something. Do you hear me?" "I hear you." "Good." Olwen's hands dropped. She wiped her eyes once with the corner of her apron and pretended that she had not. "Good. Then go, and take the rabbit pie off the sill. It'll go hard by morning." Raven took the rabbit pie off the sill. She walked back through the kitchen to the main room of the inn, and she stopped at the door. She turned. Olwen had already gone back to her dough, was already rolling it out with the wooden pin as if nothing had happened, which was the shape of Olwen's love, and always would be. "Olwen," Raven said. Olwen did not turn around. Thank you. For 6 months of not asking." The wooden pin paused on the dough. Olwen did not turn around. Her voice, when it came, was thick and entirely ordinary. "Any time, love." Raven stepped out of the kitchen. She packed a small satchel in the back room of the shop, 2 changes of clothes, her healer's roll of herbs and instruments, a clean knife cloth, 3 silver coins, and 11 copper halfpennies, the signet ring in its own small wrapped cloth, and the end loaf of Olwen's bread from the morning. She wrote a small sign on a square of clean parchment and pinned it to the inside of the shop door. "Closed for 1 week. Back before the next full moon." She locked the door. She pocketed the key. She walked down the 3 wooden steps, and she crossed the main street of Blackthorn Crossing toward the inn, and she did not look back. Kael Thorne was waiting in the yard of the inn with Thyra at his left shoulder and a slim saddled gray mare standing ready beside his own great black horse. When Raven came across the yard with her satchel over her shoulder and her hood up against the falling snow, he bowed his head to her once and said, "The mare's name is Cinder. She is a steady walker, and she is very patient with quiet riders. She is yours for the journey home and for as long after as you wish her." "Thank you. Captain Thyra will ride at your left. I will ride at your right. If you wish one of us to move back or forward at any point, you need only say." "Understood." Thyra offered Raven a gloved hand. Raven considered it. She accepted it, briefly, practically, the way a person accepts a stirrup, and swung up into the saddle. The mare shifted under her and settled. Raven arranged her skirts over the saddle and took up the reins and looked down at the Alpha King of the Northern Territories from horseback, and she said, "Lead." He swung up onto his own horse in one long, easy motion. He lifted his hand. The party, 6 gray-cloaked riders, a single pack horse, and now Raven in the middle, moved out of the yard of the inn at a steady walk. Olwen was standing in the doorway of the kitchen watching. She did not wave. Raven did not wave back. They held each other's eyes for a long beat across the yard, and then Olwen nodded once, and Raven nodded once, and Raven rode out of Blackthorn Crossing under a sky the color of an old silver coin, with the first real snowfall of deep winter beginning to come down around her. They rode in silence for the first hour. The road climbed steadily out of the valley and up into the foothills. The snow grew heavier. Thyra rode at Raven's left without speaking, occasionally turning her head a fraction to scan the trees, but otherwise carrying herself with the relaxed, professional competence of a soldier who had done 1,000 escort rides and considered this one exactly as routine as any other. Kael rode at Raven's right at the same steady walk. He did not look at her. He did not speak. He let her have the silence, and the silence was a generous thing. Raven had not known until that moment how tired she was of people who filled silences. Near the end of the first hour, when the sky had darkened and the snow had begun to slant sideways into their faces, Kael turned his head a small fraction and said, quietly, into the wind. There is a ruined watchtower about a mile up the road. It is still roofed. We will stop there for the night. It is an hour sooner than I would like, but the weather is turning, and I will not push you into a blizzard on your first day. You are not pushing me anywhere. Thank you. We will still stop. She did not argue. The ruined watchtower was exactly where he had said it was. A squat stone tower with a collapsed outer wall and a still intact inner chamber with a stone fireplace and a wooden floor. Thyra and 2 of the guards had a fire going inside within 20 minutes of their arrival and a pot of water boiling over it within 30. The horses were stabled under a low stone overhang at the side of the tower. Raven's satchel was set by the fire. A bedroll was laid out for her in the driest corner. A cup of hot tea was put into her hand by Thyra without comment. Kael did not sit beside Raven by the fire. He sat at the far side of the chamber with his back against the stone wall and a single small wax tablet balanced on his knee, writing short notes with a small stick of hardened charcoal. Raven watched him for a while without pretending she was not watching him. She noticed that he held the tablet at a slight angle so that anyone walking past would not be able to read what he was writing. She noticed that he paused every few entries to glance at the door of the chamber. She noticed that he did not glance at her. After she had finished her tea, she stood up. She walked across the chamber. She sat down on the wooden floor 2 arm lengths from his right side, close enough that they could speak in low voices, far enough that her knee did not touch his. He looked up from his tablet. "May I see what you are writing?" she said. He turned the tablet so she could see. It was a list, the same list from the parchment, but longer. There were names on this list that had not been on the one he had shown her in the shop. Names she did not recognize. Some of the names had small marks beside them, a dot, a line, a cross, a small circle. Some had several marks. At the bottom below the list, in his neat slanted hand, Ravenel Stormhold, alive, willing, knows the ring. What do the marks mean? The dot means I have a witness who knew her. The line means I have a body. The cross means the family has been told. The small circle means I have not yet been able to tell the family because I cannot find them. How many circles? 19. 19. Yes, you have 19 women whose bodies you have found and whose families you cannot tell because you do not know who their families are. That is correct. She sat with that. She let the number go through her. Then she said, I know 11 of them. His eyes lifted. For the first time since she had met him, something changed in his face. Not surprise, and he was not a man who showed surprise, but a kind of careful attention and alertness. He set the charcoal down. 11. I was in Harland Drake's house for 6 months. He kept ledgers in a locked drawer in his study. He left the keys on the chain at his belt. On the night I left, I took the keys and I opened the drawer and I read the ledgers, one by one, cover to cover. I have a memory that does not fade. I can give you 11 names that match the entries in his ledgers with dates of acquisition and disposition. Some of them will be on your list of circles. Some of them will not. Some of them are women you may not yet know are dead. Kael was very still. You can give me 11 names. And the villages they came from, where Harland noted it, and the dates, and the names of the operatives who brought them, and in some cases the amounts paid. It is all in my head. It has been in my head for 6 months. Ravenel, yes. Are you telling me that you have been carrying the names of 11 missing women, unspoken for 6 months, in a herbalist shop in Blackthorn Crossing? Yes. He closed his eyes. He closed his eyes for longer than she had expected. When he opened them, the silver gray was slightly darker than it had been, and he said very quietly, Thank you for coming with me. You asked. Yes. No one had asked before. I am aware. That is a failure of my office, and I will not make you a speech about it. I will only ask, if you are willing, would you give me one name tonight? Just one. So that I can begin the work of finding her family, and so that when we ride into Thornehall 3 days from now, my counselor Maven can already have a letter on her desk for the one I have not yet been able to write. Raven thought about it. She looked into the fire for a long while. The flames were low and orange and steady, and the sound of the wind against the stone of the tower was like a very old song being hummed through a very long throat. She said, her name was Ines Vale. She was 17 years old when Harland took her. She was a weaver's apprentice from a village called Harrowdale in the far eastern marches. She was brought to Drakehold in the 3rd week of summer 2 years ago, and she died before the first snow of that winter. Harland's ledger does not say how. His ledger said only fevered, did not recover. She had a younger brother named Merrick, who was 14 when she was taken. If you send the letter to Harrowdale, the village elder's name is Bren, and Bren will know how to find Merrick. Merrick was the one who tried to follow her. I heard of him from another of the women in Harland's house. He was turned back at the border of the Black Mountains in winter. He is still in Harrowdale. I would be surprised if he has given her up. Kael had picked up the charcoal again halfway through. He was writing as she spoke, neatly, without hurry. When she finished, he read back what he had written. Name, age, village, date taken, date died, cause unknown, brother's name, elder's name, note on the brother, and she confirmed it, and he added one small mark beside her name on the list. A small half circle. She had not seen him make that mark before. What does the half circle mean? It means I know how to find the family, and I will write the letter tonight, before I sleep. Tonight. Yes. You ride all day in a blizzard, and you write the letter tonight. I write the letter as soon as I have the name Ravenel. I have written 63 of them in 2 years. I will write 1,000 of them if that is what it costs. Sleeping on a name after I know it, that is not something I allow myself. Raven looked at him for a long, quiet moment. She said, Inessie liked pears. He wrote it down. She gave him the second name after the fire had burned down to embers. His name was Tamsin Rook, and she had been 19. He wrote her down. She gave him the third name in the middle of the night when they had both been lying awake in their separate corners pretending to sleep. Her name was Delacombe, and she had been 23. He lit a small candle, and he wrote her down too. By the time the gray dawn came through the broken outer wall of the watchtower, Raven had given him 5 of the 11 names, and Kael Thorne had written 5 letters in his neat, slanted hand on 5 sheets of parchment from his saddlebag, and he had sealed each one with dark green wax and the silver thorn of his house, and he had laid them in a neat stack beside his bedroll with the care of a man laying flowers. Raven slept for the last 2 hours before dawn. She slept more deeply than she had slept in 6 months. They reached Thornehall on the 4th day. The hold rose out of the pines on a high mountain shoulder, a gray stone fortress with tall, narrow towers, dark green banners with silver thorns hanging from the gatehouse, the first honey-colored dawn light just touching the battlements when they came up the last stretch of road. Raven sat up straighter in the saddle. Thyra, riding at her left, said quietly, without turning her head, "First time seeing it from the east road is worth it." "It is." "I cried the first time." "Did you?" "Do not tell anyone. I will deny it." Raven's mouth turned up at the corner. Thyra's did too. It was the first direct moment between the two of them, and it sat very easily, and neither of them did anything more with it than that. They rode through the main gate at full dawn. The yard inside was busy with mourning. Stable hands, a kitchen boy carrying a basket of eggs, 2 guards drilling quietly at the far wall. A tall, thin old woman in undyed wool robes stood at the top of the steps leading up to the main hall. Her long white hair was braided down her back, and a heavy silver pendant shaped like an open eye rested against her chest. She watched the party ride in with perfect stillness. Kael dismounted first. He handed his reins to a stable hand, then turned and offered a hand up to Raven to help her down. She accepted it. Her hand was on his gloved hand for no more than 3 seconds. It was the first time they had touched. The old woman came down the steps. She stopped 1 step above the yard. She looked at Raven. "Ravenel Stormhold." "Yes." "My name is Maven. I am the king's counselor. I have known you were coming for 3 days. I have had a room made up for you at the top of the east tower, with a window that faces the dawn. I have had a bath drawn, and a meal set out, and clean clothes laid out on the bed, and I have told every member of this household that if any of them asks you a single question about anything before you have had your breakfast and your bath and your sleep, I will personally take them apart and put them back together in the wrong order. Are you hungry?" "A little." "Then we will feed you first. This way." Raven followed her up the stone steps. She did not look back at Kael. She heard behind her the quiet sound of him beginning to give orders to Thyra. The 5 letters to be sent by courier this morning, the list to be updated on the great ledger in the council chamber, the 6 more names, still in Raven's head, to be written down carefully over the course of the next 3 days, at her pace, and not before. He was not speaking loudly. He was not speaking to impress her. He was doing the work. Raven followed Maven into the hall. The East Tower room was as Maven had described it. Small and warm, a narrow bed with clean linen, a copper bath already steaming, a small table with dark bread and yellow cheese, and a bowl of winter apples and a pitcher of warm ale, and a single tall window that faced directly east. A pale gold slant of dawn fell across the floor. Raven sat on the edge of the bed and she looked at the window. She did not, for a long moment, know what to do with herself in a room that was hers. Maven, who had followed her into the room and was standing near the door with her hands folded in the sleeves of her robe, said, "Take your time. No one will come. When you are ready, there is a bell by the bed. Ring it, and breakfast will be replaced with whatever you want. Hot water will be refreshed whenever you ask. The door locks from the inside. The key is on the bedside table. The door locks from the inside." Yes. Raven looked at the key. It was a heavy iron key on a small leather loop. She picked it up. She held it. "Thank you." "You are very welcome." Maven inclined her head. She moved to leave. "Maven." The old woman paused. "Yes, child." Raven held the key between her thumb and forefinger. She looked at it, not at Maven. "Does he know," she said, "that he is asking me to finish something?" Maven was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very gently, "He knows that you are finishing something. He is offering to be at your back while you do it. He is not asking anything else of you, Ravenel. Not anything. Whatever you decide about him, or about this hold, or about any of us at the end of the week or the month or the year, it will be your decision without any pressure from any of us. He is very clear about that. It is one of the few things he has been very clear about for a long time." "Why?" "Because he has spent 2 years speaking for women who could not speak, and he has learned, doing that the ones who can speak do not need him to decide anything for them. They need him to listen and to move." Raven set the key back on the table. "Thank you, Maven." "You are very welcome, Ravenel. Eat, bathe, sleep. When you wake up, it will still be winter, and the ledger will still be here, and Garrick Drake will still be alive. And we will still have 3 days before we need to move. Take every one of them." She closed the door behind her. Raven did not lock it. She ate the bread and cheese. She drank the warm ale. She bathed in water so hot her skin turned pink, and her silver blonde braid, let down, darkened to the color of wet iron. She slept in the narrow bed under 2 heavy wool blankets, and she dreamed, for the first time in 6 months, of her mother's hands braiding her hair in front of a summer window when she was small, and of her father laughing at something she could not quite hear, and of a house full of people who had loved her before the world had decided otherwise. She did not dream of Drakehold. She did not dream of Harland. She slept until the 4th bell of the afternoon, and when she woke, the slant of sun across the floor had moved from east to west, and there was a single small silver bell on the table beside her bed that she had not noticed on arrival, and beside the bell was a folded note in the neat slanted hand she had learned to recognize in 4 days. The note said, "Only when you are ready, no hurry. K." She read the note twice. She put it in the pocket of her clean wool dress. She rang the bell. The next 2 days at Thornehall were the strangest 2 days of Raven's life, and they were strange because nothing in them was strange. No one came to her door unless she rang the bell. No one asked her where she was going when she walked the corridors. No one asked her why she was still carrying the hunting knife on her belt when she sat down at the long council table to give Kael the remaining 6 names. No one asked her, at the evening meal the first night, why she chose the chair at the far end of the table where she could see both doors, and no one commented when, on the second evening, she moved 1 chair closer to the head of the table, and no one said anything on the morning after that, when she moved 1 chair closer still and sat on Kael's right hand, with her back to one door, but not the other, because she had been watching the guard rotation and had established to her own satisfaction that the door behind her would not open without at least 2 people knowing about it. She gave him the names one at a time, in her own pace, in her own order. She gave him Lyra of Hallow Bend on the first afternoon. She gave him Meryl and Soren, 2 women Harland had acquired in the same week from the same ruined market on on the first evening. She gave him Vessa Arden, whose ledger entry had read only "sold on," and whose fate Raven did not know, on the second morning, and Kael wrote down a new set of marks, a small open square, and explained that it meant he now had to try to find who she had been sold on to, and Raven told him the name of the man Harland had sold her to, because she had memorized that too. And Kael went very still for a moment and said quietly, "That man has been on my list for a year." And she said, "Then he is on it for the right reasons." She gave him Nairn Calder on the second afternoon. Nairn was the one that took her a long time to say. Nairn had been the woman who slept in the room beside Raven's at Drakehold. Naren had whispered through the wall at night. For the entire 6 months Raven had been there. Naren was the one who had told Raven about the keys on Harland's belt and about the side door at the back of the east wing and about the path through the kitchen garden to the ridge trail. Naren had planned to run with her. Naren had not been well enough on the night they were supposed to go. Naren had told her to go anyway. I went anyway, Raven said, sitting at the great council table with a half-empty cup of tea cooling between her hands. She told me to. She said one of us should go and then find help. I went and I did not find help. I got to the ravine and Harland was on the ridge trail behind me with a crossbow and I had to finish it there before he could finish me. And then I ran. And I ran west. I did not go back for her. I could not have reached her again. Even if I had gone back, Harland was going to be missed the next morning, and once he was missed, the whole house would be locked down, and Garrick would have sent men, and I did not go back. Kael set his charcoal down. He folded his hands on the table in front of him. He did not reach across the table. He did not touch her. He said very quietly, "If you had gone back, you would be dead, and Naren Calder would still be dead, and your name would be on this ledger with a line through it, and no one would ever have spoken her name aloud again. You chose the only door that led out of that house with any living person in it. You chose correctly. I left her. You left a woman who told you to leave her. I should have gone back. You should have done exactly what you did, Ravenel. And then, if you want, you will get, in the next fortnight, the chance to do the thing you could not do then. You will get the chance to go to Drakehold with an army at your back, and you will get the chance to stand in Garrick's hall, and you will get the chance to say Naren Calder's name aloud, in the room where she died, in front of the man who let it happen. You will get to do that. Nothing gives any of it back, but you will get to do that." Raven looked at her hands on the table. She said, "Yes." That was all she said. Kael did not ask her to expand on it. Maven, sitting at the far end of the table, with her silver pendant catching the candlelight, did not ask her to expand on it. Thyra, standing at the door with her arms folded, and an expression that suggested she had been waiting 2 years to go to Drakehold, and was only barely containing herself, did not ask her to expand on it. She gave him the last name on the 3rd morning. Ilsa of the Long Valley. 16 years old when she was taken, died at Drakehold in the 2nd month. Family in the Long Valley, father a cooper, mother a baker, a younger sister named Fen. Kael wrote the letter that afternoon. That evening they were to ride out at dawn. The council that was called in the great hall of Thornehall that night was a small one. Kael, Maven, Thyra, 2 of Thyra's lieutenants, a graying bearded man named Hoth, who was Kael's master of scouts, and Raven. A long map was spread across the council table with silver coins and dark wooden markers laid across it. Drakehold sat near the top, marked with a small carved black drake. Other markers, dozens of them, were placed along the roads and in the villages and at the passes. "Tell me how you would do it," Kael said to Raven, without preamble, once everyone was seated. Raven looked up. "Pardon?" "How you would take Drakehold. You have been inside. You have lived in the house. You have seen the guard rotation. You have watched Garrick come and go. I have my own plan, and Hoth has his own plan, and Thyra has hers, and Maven has hers, and they are all good plans. But none of us have been inside. Before we settle on anything, I would like to hear how the person who walked out of that house on her own feet would walk back in." Raven looked at the map. She said, "Your plan goes through the main gate." "It does." "Your plan will work, but it will take a day, and Garrick will have time to burn his ledgers." "Yes." "The ledgers are the point." "Yes, they are." "Then you do not go in through the main gate. You come up the ridge trail on the south side. It is narrow, 2 abreast at most. You cannot bring an army up it, but you can bring 20 people. Maven can come up the main road with a delegation of 40 and a white flag and demand a parley at the front gate. Garrick will not refuse a parley because a refused parley looks like guilt, and Garrick is a man who needs to look like innocence. He will open the front gate and take 40 of Maven's people into the great hall, and he will sit them down with ale and cheese, and he will listen to whatever Maven says for as long as she needs to say it, because that is the kind of performance Garrick enjoys. Yes. While he is doing that, 20 of you come up the south ridge. I will lead you. I know the path. The east wing side door is where I went out. It opens from the outside, if you know the trick. The trick is a bent iron pin that Naren found one summer and never told anyone about. It is still bent. I watched it for 6 months. It is still the same door. You go in through the east wing. You take the study on the 2nd floor. The ledgers are in the locked drawer of the desk. Harland kept the keys, and I have Harland's keys. They are in the satchel in my room. But even without the keys, the wood of the drawer is soft, and you will have it open in under a minute with a small crowbar. You take the ledgers, every one of them. You take them out the east wing and down the south ridge before Maven finishes her parley. Garrick never knows you were there until you are gone. Then Maven stands up and tells him what you have taken. And then it is over. You can take him however you want. He can fight or he can surrender. It does not matter. The evidence is already walking down the mountain in your saddlebag. There was a long silence around the table. Thyra looked at Kael. Kael looked at Thyra. Thyra said, I want her plan. Maven said, I also want her plan. Hoth said, it is a much better plan than mine. Kael did not smile. Kael did not smile often, but the corner of his mouth moved a fraction. He said, we use her plan. Raven said, one adjustment. Yes. Naren Calder's body is in the small cemetery at the back of the house, under the ash tree. I saw them bury her the morning I left. When your people come out of the east wing with the ledgers, I would like 2 of them to go around the back and bring her with us. Yes. She should not stay there. She will not stay there. Thank you. Ravenel. Yes. If there are any of the other women still inside the house, then we bring them out. Yes. I will know their names. I know you will. They rode out of Thornehall at dawn the next morning, 40 riders on the main road with Maven at the center and a white parley flag snapping in the wind, and a smaller party of 20 on the South Ridge Trail with Kael, Thyra, Hoth, 17 hand-picked scouts, and Raven leading from the front. The mountain was full of pine and snow and the kind of brittle winter silence that breaks like glass when a bird moves in a tree. Raven rode at the head of her small column on her gray mare Cinder, and she did not look back, and she did not look forward more than 3 trees ahead at a time, and she led them up the path she had come down 6 months ago in the other direction, in the dark, barefoot for the first day because her boots had filled with blood. It took 2 days to reach the ridge above Drakehold. They waited out the second night in a hollow below the ridge, cold and smokeless. Maven's party was a day ahead of them on the main road, and they had spent the last evening an extra day's ride east to let Kael's party get into position. When the dawn of the 3rd day came, Raven led her 20 up the final stretch of the ridge and down the goat path on the far side. The east wing side door of Drakehold sat in the gray stone wall below them, exactly as she had left it, boarded up from the outside with 2 loose planks, the bent iron pin still in the latch, a patch of frozen weeds along the base that had grown exactly as it had always grown because no one ever came out of this door and no one ever went in. She was first to the door. Kael was at her shoulder, his breathing steady, his silver eyes fixed on the latch. Thyra was at her back with 6 scouts fanned out behind her. Raven reached for the bent iron pin. Her hand did not shake. She flicked it upward the way Naren had taught her to flick it, and the latch gave with the same small, worn click it had given on the night she had walked out. She pushed the door open. The east wing corridor was dark and cold. The house smelled the way it had always smelled, dust, old wine, and under both a faint copper note like a blade left out too long. Raven breathed at once. She did not flinch. She turned to Thyra, and she mouthed, "Study, upstairs, 3rd door." Thyra nodded. They moved. They were inside the house for 9 minutes. Hoth's scouts took the upstairs corridor in 2 teams of 3 and moved silent as cloth through the dim morning light. Thyra and 4 more scouts broke the drawer of the desk in Harland's old study, open with a single small crowbar, and Raven stood at the study window, watching the yard below as Thyra piled the 6 ledgers into a leather satchel and slung it over her shoulder. A maid passed in the corridor outside the study once, saw the open door, saw Thyra, saw a scout behind Thyra, opened her mouth to scream, and Raven, who had crossed the room in 3 quick steps and placed herself in the doorway, said quietly, "Maida, it is Raven. Go quietly into the kitchen and wait for the noise. No one will hurt you. No one will hurt any of the women in this house. We are here for the ledgers and we are here for him." Maida, the downstairs maid, 30 years old, soft hands, 2 daughters in a village 4 days east, looked at Raven for 1 long second, and then she nodded once, and she walked very quietly down the back stair and into the kitchen, and she sat down at the kitchen table and she waited. They took the ledgers out of the east wing in 7 more minutes. 2 of Hoth's scouts peeled off around the back of the house to the small cemetery under the ash tree. Raven had drawn them a small map. They carried a rolled canvas and 2 long poles. The rest of them, Kael, Thyra, 14 scouts, and Raven, did not go back out the east wing door. They went down the main staircase of the house. They went down the main staircase of Drakehold in broad daylight in a silent line, with Raven at the front and the ledgers on Thyra's back, and Kael at Raven's right shoulder, walking at her pace, and they came into the great hall of Drakehold through the inner door, and they walked the length of the hall without stopping, and they came out into the middle of Garrick Drake's parley. The great hall of Drakehold was long and narrow, and lined with tall windows along its southern wall. Pale winter light slanted in across the stone floor. A high table sat at the far end of the hall, Garrick's table, the one Raven had never sat at and had never been allowed to sit at. Because she had not been a guest of Drakehold, she had been a possession of the younger brothers, and possessions did not sit at the high table. Today the high table had Garrick Drake at the center of it, and on either side of him sat 3 of his captains, heavy men in dark reds and blacks, their hands on their cups, their eyes already on Maven's delegation, which had been seated along a long, low table in the middle of the hall with every appearance of being listened to politely while the captains quietly counted the number of Maven's guards. Maven was in the middle of a sentence. She stopped mid-sentence. She turned her head toward the inner door of the hall, and she watched, with the calm, interested expression of a woman who had arranged exactly this moment and had been waiting only to see it happen. As Raven Stormhold walked into the great hall of Drakehold with a hunting knife at her belt and the Alpha King of the Northern Territories 1 full step behind her on her right, Garrick Drake looked up. He saw Maven's expression first. Then he followed her eyes to the inner door. He saw Raven. He did not see Kael. Kael was behind her, hood back, silver gray eyes on the high table, sword at his hip still sheathed. For a very long second, Garrick Drake saw only Raven. He saw the silver blonde braid and the pale, ice-blue eyes and the hunting knife at her belt. And Raven watched his face across the long hall, and she saw him go through every stage a methodical man goes through. When a ledger line he has been assuming was closed, walks across the floor of his own house. She saw him recognize her. She saw him understand what her walking in meant about his brother. She saw him understand, half a second later, what her walking in at the head of a column of strangers meant about him. And then she saw him see the silver thorn on the cloak of the man behind her. Garrick Drake stood up very slowly. He did not speak. His mouth opened once and then closed. The 2 captains on his left stood up with him, hands already moving toward their belts. One of the captains on his right did not stand because he was, Raven noticed, the kind of man who thought before he moved, and he was already looking at the 16 scouts fanned along the wall behind the inner door and doing the sum. Kael stepped around Raven's right side. He did not come in front of her. He came abreast. He stood at her right shoulder with the same easy-balanced stillness Raven had first seen at the door of her herbalist's shop, and he said, across the length of the great hall, in the low voice that carried further than shouting, "Garrick Drake! Your Grace! I am here on the king's warrant of 2 years ago. You are hereby removed from any claim to this hold and to the lands that accompany it. You are hereby bound over to the judgment of the combined council of the Northern Territories on 63 counts of trafficking, 12 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of murder, and 1 count of harboring a fugitive from my warrant. Your brother, Harland. Your captains have the choice to surrender where they stand or to be killed where they stand. I recommend the first." The captain on the right, who had not stood up slowly. He held his hands palm out. He sat down again on the bench, which in the hall of a war captain was the same as laying down a sword. The other 2 captains looked at him. After a long beat, they did the same. Garrick did not sit down. He had not, for the length of Kael's recitation, taken his eyes off Raven. He was smiling now. It was a small, thin smile with nothing warm in it. It was the smile of a man who had just understood exactly what was happening and had decided, as methodical men do, that if he could not have the afternoon he had planned, he would have a different one. "Hello, Ravenel," he said. Raven did not answer. "My brother told me about you. In a letter, in late summer, he said he had, how did he put it, acquired an interesting one." Raven did not answer. "I have been wondering where you got to." Kael very quietly did not move. Garrick said, "Your Grace has brought my brother's little ghost home. How thoughtful. Tell me, Ravenel, Where is Harland? Raven took one slow breath in. She let it out. She said, in a ravine in the Black Mountains 2 days' ride south of here, under a snowdrift that will melt in spring. He has been there for 6 months. I killed him on the ridge trail the night he tried to finish me with a crossbow. I pushed him over the edge of the ravine and I walked away, and I have been carrying his signet ring in my pocket for 6 months waiting to give it to you. She took the silver ring out of the pocket of her wool dress. She held it up where he could see it from across the hall. Here is your brother. Garrick's face did not change, not with grief, not with rage. It went through some small rearrangement that was neither the small rearrangement of a man who had been waiting for confirmation of a fact he had already privately decided was true 6 months ago and had been managing the inconvenience of ever since. He looked at the ring, he looked at her. He said, I should have come for you myself. You should have. I sent men. They did not find me. They did not look in the obvious place. I assumed you were dead. I know you did. That was your mistake. It seems it was. He looked at Kael. He looked back at Raven. You, he said slowly, are the Omega who walked out of my brother's house with no help and no supplies and no knowledge of the mountains and walked 16 days west to a village I do not even know the name of. Yes. And you then spent 6 months not coming back. Yes. And you did not come back because you could not reach me. Yes. And now you have come back. Yes. With the Alpha King of the Northern Territories behind you. He is not behind me, Raven said very quietly. He is beside me. He is witness. This is my door, not his. I asked him to walk me through it. He agreed. Garrick laughed. It was not a large laugh. It was a small, dry laugh, the laugh of a man who had found, in the last few seconds, something genuinely funny. Then say what you came to say, Ravenel. Let us not waste the king's time. You do not interrupt me. You do not speak until I am finished. You will be bound. You will be tried. You will be sentenced by the Council of the Northern Territories, not by me. I am not here to kill you, Garrick. I killed your brother because he was the one who touched me, and he gave me the choice on the ridge trail of either killing him or being killed. And I made the practical choice. You are a different problem. You are the one with the ledgers and the correspondence and the names. And you are worth more to the women on your brother's list, alive and writing in a witness chair, than dead with a knife in your gut. So you will live for now, and you will write down every name you have ever written down, and then the council will decide. Garrick's smile had not moved. I am listening. Ravenel, what is it you came to say? Raven held the ring up again between her thumb and forefinger. She said, Inessie Vale, 17, Weaver's apprentice, Harrowdale, fevered and did not recover. Garrick's smile did not move. Tamsin Rook, 19, Potter's daughter, Black Hollow, did not recover. Della Coombe, 23, tavern keeper's wife, Ashen Ridge, died in winter. She walked the length of the hall as she spoke. She kept the ring up. She did not raise her voice. She went through every name. All 6 she had given Kael, and the 5 she had given before, and 4 more. 4 she had not given Kael because they were the ones she had been unable to say aloud at Thornehall. And she had decided somewhere between the ridge and the east wing door that she would say them here, in this hall, in front of this man, as the first time she ever let them out of her head. Naren Calder, she said, and she was standing 10 feet from the high table now, and Garrick's captains were on the floor with their hands on their heads, and Kael's scouts were at every door of the great hall, and Maven was on her feet at the long, low table with her silver pendant catching the pale winter light, and Thyra was at Raven's shoulder with the satchel of ledgers on her back. 21, my friend. The woman in the room beside mine who whispered through the wall for 6 months and told me about the keys, and about the bent iron pin, and about the ridge path. She was sick the night we were supposed to run. She told me to go without her. I went. She is buried under the ash tree at the back of your house. She is being carried out now by 2 of the king's scouts, and she will not be left in your ground. Garrick's smile had at last faded. Raven stopped in front of the high table. She set Harland's ring down on the wood. She said, I stopped at 1 because I could not reach you. I can reach you now. I am choosing not to, because the council wants you alive, because the ledgers want you alive, because the women in those ledgers. She did not have to nod at Thyra. Thyra lifted the satchel once, briefly to show him. Want you alive and useful and on a witness chair in the north, not dead in your own hall at my hand. I am giving you your life, Garrick. It is the only thing of yours I have ever asked for, and it is the only thing I will ever take. Garrick Drake at last sat back down. He stared at Harland's ring on the wood of his high table. He did not pick it up. Kael stepped forward one pace. Thyra, your grace. Take him, your grace. It was over very quickly after that. Thyra and 6 of her scouts had Garrick Drake bound and the 3 captains disarmed before Garrick had finished looking at his brother's ring. The remaining scouts moved through the house calmly, room by room, gathering the other women of Drakehold. There were 4, 3 kitchen maids and a seamstress, and telling each of them, quietly and carefully, that no one was going to hurt them, that the king was here, that they could stay or they could go, and that the king's healer was waiting in a warm cart on the main road below if they wished to ride south. Maida, the downstairs maid, came up out of the kitchen with her hands folded in her apron and a small bundle of her own things over her shoulder. She walked up to Raven in the great hall and she said only, "Thank you for coming back, Raven," and Raven said, "Thank you for being kind to me in a bad house," and Maida went to join the others. Raven did not watch Garrick being taken out of the hall. She turned. She walked the length of the great hall back the way she had come. She walked out of the inner door, and she walked through the east wing corridor that smelled of old wine and copper, and she walked out the east wing side door with the bent iron pin. She did not close it behind her. She left it standing open. And she walked around to the back of the house to the small cemetery under the ash tree. 2 of Hoth's scouts had already lifted Naren Calder out of the winter ground. They had wrapped her in the clean canvas and laid her on the long poles, and they were standing, hats off, at her head and foot, waiting without hurry. Raven stopped beside the canvas. She laid her hand briefly on the place where Naren's folded hands would be. She said, very quietly, so that only Naren would have been able to hear her if Naren had been listening, I came back. I came back in the front door. I brought a king and 20 scouts and a seer with a silver pendant. Garrick is bound. Your name was the first one I said in the hall. I am bringing you home. I do not know where home is for you, Naren, but it is not here. It will be somewhere we can find it together. She wiped her face once with the back of her hand. She turned, and the scouts lifted the canvas on the long poles between them, and they walked slowly down the track toward the main road, where Maven's healer and a warm cart and the other women were waiting. Raven walked with them. Kael fell in at her right shoulder halfway down the track. He did not speak. He matched her pace. When she stumbled once on a patch of frozen mud, he did not catch her. He let her right herself, which was what she had wanted. And then he walked the rest of the way beside her without saying anything at all. At the bottom of the track, Thyra met them with Cinder saddled and ready. The 6 women from the house were already in the cart, wrapped in wool blankets, with Maven's healer speaking to each of them in a low, warm voice. Naren Calder's canvas was laid, reverently, in the back of a second cart. Someone, Raven did not see who, had placed a small bunch of dried winter heather on the canvas where her hands would be. Raven stood at the side of the road for a long moment, looking up at the gray stone mass of Drakehold on the ridge above them. The house looked the same as it had 6 months ago. It was not the same. It would, she suspected, never be anyone's home again, and that was the best thing any house in this valley had ever had done to it. She turned her back on it. She swung up into Cinder's saddle. Kael mounted beside her. Thyra rode up to Raven's left. Maven's cart creaked into motion. The column, 61 riders now, 2 carts, 2 extra horses for the women from the house, and the canvas of Naren Calder under the small bunch of winter heather, began to move slowly south down the snowed-in track toward the pass, and the pass was the long road home, and the long road home was Thornehall, and Raven did not look back. It was 5 days back to Thornehall, because the cart with the 6 women and the cart with Naren Calder set a slower pace than the ride-out had been, and because the weather came in heavy on the second night and forced the column to hold up for almost a full day in a hollow beneath a stand of black pines. Raven did not mind the slow pace. She rode mostly at the front of the column with Kael and Thyra, and sometimes she dropped back to ride beside the cart of the 6 women. 3 of them she did not know, 3 of them she had known at the house, all of them she named when she spoke to them, none of them she pressed to speak back. She rode beside Naren Calder's cart for the whole of the 3rd morning, and no one came near her during that morning, and when she came back to the front of the column, her face was red from wind and something else. And Kael did not look at her, and Thyra did not look at her, and neither of them remarked on it. They came up the east road to Thornehall at full dark on the 5th night. The lanterns in the gatehouse were already lit. A crowd had gathered in the main yard, kitchen staff and stable hands and half the hold's guard off duty, to see the column in. The 6 women from Drakehold were taken immediately to the healer's wing, where Maven had already arranged rooms for each of them, each room with its own bath and its own bed and its own lock on the inside of its own door. Naren Calder's cart was taken through the yard and out the north gate to the small, consecrated ground under the oaks, where a single lantern had been lit at a freshly dug grave. Raven walked up the hill behind the cart with Kael at her right, and she stood at the edge of the grave while Maven spoke the old words over it, not in the Drake language, which was harsh, and not in the common tongue, which was practical, but in the old northern tongue, which was the language Naren had been born speaking and the one her mother would have sung her lullabies in. Raven said the names of all the other women aloud at Naren's grave. She said 11 names. The wind carried each of them clear into the trees. Maven stood on Raven's left. Kael stood on Raven's right. Thyra stood 2 paces behind. No one tried to hold her. No one tried to cover her while she cried. No one tried to hurry her along. Kael did at one point, with one gloved hand, adjust the fall of his own cloak so that the edge of it hung between Raven and the worst of the wind off the valley, and Raven noticed, and Raven did not move. He adjusted it back when the wind shifted an hour later and the cloak was no longer needed. Neither of them remarked on it. The 6 women from the house slept at Thornehall for 2 weeks. Over those 2 weeks, with Maven's help and Raven's, they were returned or settled or sent onward according to what each of them wanted. 3 went home, 1 to a village where her father was still living, 2 to a cousin's farm in the south. 1 asked to stay at Thornehall to work in the kitchens, and Maven arranged it. 1 asked to be sent on to a port town on the eastern coast, where a sister was working as a sailmaker, and the king paid for a guard detail and a passage. The last, the youngest, a girl of 16 named Sari, whom Raven had not known at Drakehold and who had been there only 3 months, asked Raven, shyly, one afternoon in the warm kitchen, if she might become Raven's apprentice. Raven blinked at her once. She said, "I do not have a shop anymore," Sari said. "You could have one here." Raven said, "I will think about it." Sari went back to her bread. 2 days later, Raven told Maven that she would take Sari as apprentice if Maven would find her the materials for a small herbalist's room on the ground floor of the East Tower. Maven had the room ready within the week. Garrick Drake was tried at Thornehall a month after his arrest. He was tried by the combined council of the Northern Territories, with Maven presiding and 7 lords and 3 ladies from the great and small holds of the north seated in judgment. Raven sat at the witness table for the whole trial. She did not flinch when Garrick's counsel cross-questioned her. She did not soften the details when Maven asked her to elaborate. She gave, in careful order, every name she had carried out of his brother's house in her head, and she matched each name to an entry in one of the 6 ledgers now stacked on Maven's table, and she named every operative of the Drake crew she had ever heard named, and she named every alpha Harland had sold a woman onto. The trial took 11 days. At the end of it, Garrick Drake was stripped of his title, his lands, and the last of his name. The council did not sentence him to death because the Council of the North had not used the death sentence in 40 years, but they sentenced him to permanent confinement in the iron-ringed fortress on the northern coast that held 3 other men of comparable crime, and they sent him there in chains, in a closed wagon with a guard of 20, and the closed wagon rolled out of Thornehall at dawn on the 12th morning, and Raven watched it go from the window of her East Tower room. And she did not feel triumphant, and she did not feel empty. She felt only, and she noted this privately, with the attention of a healer taking stock of a fever finally broken. She felt tired, in the way a body is tired the morning after a very long walk has finally ended. She slept for 2 days after the wagon left. When she woke, on the 3rd morning, there was a note on the table beside her bed in the neat slanted hand she had been used to receiving notes in. The note said, "When you are ready, in the council chamber, no hurry at all. K." She took a bath, she ate breakfast, she dressed in a clean gray wool dress, and she walked down to the council chamber at mid-morning, and she found Kael Thorne sitting at the long, dark oak council table alone, the rolled map of the Northern Territories open in front of him, and a stack of letters beside it, with a cup of dark tea at his elbow, and his long black hair tied back with a fresh leather cord. He stood up when she came in. "Ravenel, Your Grace." "Please, sit, wherever you like." She sat across from him, not beside him. She had noticed in the last 2 months at Thornehall that she did most of her thinking across from him, because across from him she could see his eyes, and his eyes did a great deal of the talking when his mouth was doing very little. He slid a small folded parchment across the table to her. "What is this?" "Your letter." "My letter?" "My office owed one to every woman in the ledger. Alive, dead, unfound. The dead and their families I wrote at the time we confirmed it. The unfound, I am still writing as we find them. The living, I wrote after the trial closed, because the living were owed a letter that could tell them the full ending. This is yours." She took the letter, she unfolded it. It was short. It said, "Ravenel Stormhold, of Drakehold once, of Blackthorn Crossing by your own choice, of Thornehall by my invitation and your acceptance. I write this letter to tell you that on the 11th day of the council trial, the house that took you is ended, and the man who ran it is bound in iron for the rest of his life, and the ledger he kept of you, and every woman he took is in my archive, and every name in that ledger has been spoken aloud in council and will be on record in the northern annals as long as my house endures. Your name is on that record. Your name was the first name I wrote in the ledger of the living on the night we met. Your name is the name I have written more letters for than any other name, because every name you gave me was a name I owed a letter to, and I owe you the writing of every one of those letters. You owe me nothing. You owe Thornehall nothing. You are free of me and of this hold from the moment you read this letter if you wish to be. If you do not wish to be, if at any point in the years ahead you wish to stay, or to leave, or to come back, or to do work with me, or to do work beside me, or to do no work at all with any of us, you have only to say. I will be at the East Tower herbalist's room at noon today with Sari, who wants to show us both how well she is coming along with the tincture for winter cough. I hope you will be there too. Kael." Raven read the letter twice. She folded it. She said, "Were you always going to write me this letter?" "Yes." "Even if I had stayed in Blackthorn Crossing?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because a letter of ending is something that is owed to every woman on that list, and a woman who walked out on her own feet is not owed less of one than a woman whose family was sent one. You are owed it. It was going to come whether I was the one delivering it or not." "Understood." He did not ask her anything else. He did not ask her whether she was going to stay. He did not ask her what she wanted. He did not ask her how she was sleeping, or how she was eating, or whether she was going to come to the East Tower at noon. He did not, in the 3 months she had now known him, ever once asked her for anything that was not information she had volunteered, and he was not going to start today. Raven said, "I will come at noon." "Thank you." She stood, she paused at the door. "Kael." It was the first time she had called him by his name. He stood up very slowly at the table. He did not speak. She said, "I am going to stay the winter. Not because you asked. You have been very careful not to ask. Because Sari needs a teacher, and Maven needs a second hand in the healer's wing, and there are 19 circles on your list that I would like to help you turn into crosses. And because my room at the top of the East Tower has a window that faces east, and I have not yet seen the dawn come up over the valley, and I would like to see it 100 times before I decide what comes after. That is all. It is not a decision about you. It is a decision about me. If that is not what you wanted to hear." "It is," he said very quietly. "Exactly, Ravenel. It is exactly what I wanted to hear." "Good. Thank you. Noon, then." "Noon." She left him in the council chamber. She walked down the stone corridor toward the East Tower, and the morning light was coming through the tall, narrow windows in long, pale gold columns, and she walked through each column in turn, warm, cold, warm, cold. And she thought, for no particular reason that she could have named, of Olwen standing in the doorway of the inn kitchen in Blackthorn Crossing with her apron on and her hands in dough and her voice ordinary, saying, "You are not the thing that happened to you." Raven paused in the middle of the corridor. She smiled. It was a small smile. It did not last long. No one saw it. It was only for herself and for Olwen and for the woman she had once been a year and a half ago in a trade post in the Black Mountains, who had had no way of knowing that she would ever be in a corridor this long, with light this warm again, with work this right ahead of her, with a man this patient waiting at the other end of it, with no one behind her and no one in front of her except the people she had chosen to stand with. She walked on to the East Tower. The East Tower herbalist's room was a small round chamber on the ground floor of the tower, with 3 tall, narrow windows facing east and a long wooden workbench under the windows. Gary was already there when Raven arrived at noon, her auburn hair tied back in a cloth kerchief, a row of small glass jars laid out on the bench, and a careful recipe written in her slow beginner's hand on a square of parchment. Kael was there as well, seated on a low wooden stool in the corner of the room, out of the way, with his cloak off and his long black hair tied back and his hands resting on his knees. He had not brought papers. He had not brought a list. He was, for the first time, Raven had seen him in 3 months, doing nothing at all. Sari looked up as Raven came in. I got the proportions wrong, but I wrote it down before I redid it, so we can see both of them. Show me, Sari showed her. Raven bent over the bench. She corrected 2 measurements and suggested a 3rd adjustment. Sari wrote the corrections down in the same slow beginner's hand, her tongue pressed slightly to the corner of her mouth in concentration. Raven stood back and let her try it again. Kael, in the corner of the room, watched them without speaking. Raven glanced over at him. He was smiling, not large, not for her, not a smile he had arranged on his face for her to see. It was the small, private smile of a man who was sitting in a warm stone room at noon, with nothing required of him, and nothing asked of him, and nothing to do but watch 2 women he respected work with their hands in the light. Raven turned back to the bench. Again, she said to Sari. Again, Sari said. The small tincture went together. The room smelled of lemon balm and white willow and something faintly sweet that Raven had not been able to identify on first inhalation, and which Sari, grinning, confessed was a little bit of honey she had added without asking because she was 10 years old once and she had had a grandmother who put honey in everything and she had missed the smell of it. Raven said that was fine and that honey was, in small quantities, a respectable addition to a winter cough tincture, and that any student who added an ingredient should be prepared to defend it, which Sari had just done, and that this was a pass. Sari beamed. Kael, in the corner, gave a small, slow clap of 3 quiet beats. Raven looked at him across the room. She said quietly, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. Noon tomorrow? Noon tomorrow. Bring tea. I will bring tea." Sari looked between the 2 of them. She did not say anything. She went back to her jars, very carefully, with the serious cheerfulness of an apprentice who had just passed her first test, and did not want to break the small, quiet spell that had settled over the room. Raven, at the workbench with the midday light slanting warm and gold across the back of her hands, turned her face into the window and let the winter sun touch her cheekbones for a long, quiet beat. She had not, she thought, spent very many noons in the last 2 years doing anything that was not either running or hiding or grinding burdock for a blacksmith's cough. This was the first noon in a long time. It was warm. It was bright. It smelled of honey and white willow. She did not, at that moment, decide about the year ahead, or about the man in the corner, or about the room she would someday call her own, or about the first child she would someday put in the narrow East Tower bed beside her own. Raven did not decide about any of those things. She did not need to. She had made the only decision she needed to make that morning in the council chamber, and that decision was to stay the winter, and the winter was long, and the ledger was long, and the work was long, and there was time for everything else. Outside the tall, narrow, east-facing windows, the first real thaw of the season had begun to come down off the roofs of Thornehall. A slow, steady drip of melt from the eaves, the sound of winter breaking up in small, ordinary ways all around the hold, the pine boughs on the hills beyond the wall shaking loose their topmost dustings of snow in long, soft slides. A single crow called, somewhere out past the gatehouse. A horse whickered in the main yard. Sari hummed, under her breath, a tune Raven had heard once in Olwen's kitchen at Blackthorn Crossing a lifetime ago. Kael, on his stool in the corner, was quiet as stone. Raven Stormhold closed her eyes for one long moment in the warm winter light of the noon sun. She listened to the drip from the eaves. She listened to Sari hum. She listened to her own heartbeat, which was steady, and which had become, in the last few weeks, and for the first time in a very long time, the heartbeat of a woman who was home. She opened her eyes. She said, "Right, next tincture." And they got back to work.